Thank you very much, Bill. And thank you very much, Audrey Clement, for joining us. We really appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation with you. We're going to follow the following agenda during this meeting. I'm going to provide a few welcoming remarks. We're then going to provide Audrey Clement, a candidate for County Board, an opportunity to make a 2-minute opening statement. We'll then move to a question and answer segment in which I'll ask the first question and then we'll rotate among our other leadership team members. As we get to the end of the hour, we're going to wrap up close to 6 o'clock and give Audrey an opportunity to make a closing statement for 2 minutes. Arlingtonians for Our Sustainable Future is a group that was formed in mid-2019 out of concern for rapid and accelerating growth and development in Arlington, its impact on our budget and on our environment. And we thought that those of us who came together to form it, that we could better engage with the county board and other elected leaders in the community by having a group of people come together and form a group like ours. We believe that the accelerated development agenda that Arlington has been following needs to be altered and greater consideration needs to be given to these environmental and fiscal impacts of development activities that the county is pursuing. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Audrey to make an initial opening statement.
I'm Audrey Clement, the independent candidate for Arlington County Board. As a 16-year Westover resident and longtime civic activist who serves on the Transportation Commission, I'm running because Arlington deserves better. My opponent, longtime incumbent Libby Garvey, has promoted harmful policies resulting in overcrowded schools, congested streets, massive tree removal on public property, gentrification, and an effective tax rate that is twice the rate of inflation. Now she is pushing missing middle upzoning, which will inflate land values, hike tax assessments, displace existing residents, and build housing unaffordable to anyone earning less than area median income, which is now about $126,000 per year. Meanwhile, newly elected county board member Takis Karantonis serves as vice chair of the Alliance for Housing Solutions, Arlington's principal advocate for upzoning. It appears that Takis has a serious conflict of interest about which Libby has been silent. The county's COVID response has also been uneven. Too little funding to deal with impending evictions, no guaranteed care for essential workers, and adoption of a sidewalk ordinance to prevent congregating in COVID hotspots that was not vetted through any relevant advisory commissions. Thus, people can be cited for queuing outside establishments where it is legal to eat and drink. If elected, I plan to act sensibly to curtail COVID spread, oppose upzoning and displacement of existing homeowners, seek immediate relief for all taxpayers, say yes to real social justice reforms, and no to symbolic gestures. If you share my agenda, visit my website at audreyclement.com, support my candidacy, and donate to my campaign. Together, we can make the Arlington way more than an empty phrase.
Thank you very much, Audrey, for that opening statement. We're now going to move to the Q&A portion of our session with you today, and I'm going to begin with the first question. You and Libby Garvey were each asked to prepare answers to written questions, which you both did, and those written questions have been posted on our website. One of those questions was styled by us as question 1, cost-benefit analysis and population density. Each of you provided answers, and my question relates to getting a response from you regarding the answer that Libby Garvey provided. And I'm going to read most of her answer to you, and then I would like you to provide us with your comments on her answer. Her answer includes the following statements. We always hear concerns about new projects that they will negatively impact our community. Therefore, we asked our staff to provide a way to measure how added projects might affect our community. While it's not possible to predict exactly how an individual project will affect Arlington, even when it meets the requirements of our planning, it is possible to ascertain how recently completed projects are affecting us. I expect the methodology to do that kind of analysis should be ready this fall, and that we can begin regular reporting on it every 6 months or so. Arlington has done a pretty good job of keeping most of our population in 11% of our land area along the urban corridors. This has helped preserve our green spaces and neighborhoods and helps the planet. For example, people in extremely dense New York City have the smallest individual carbon footprint in the nation. Crystal City has less traffic now than it did about a decade ago, and it has grown in population. We simply cannot keep covering the earth with spreading development. We have to live more densely. Well-planned density is essential to controlling global warming. If we were to decide to prevent development in our urban areas beyond what is allowed by right in Virginia, we would lose all our opportunities to support and encourage smart growth. Development would still happen, but not bring with it the benefits of good design, environmental engineering, added parks, etc., that we are able to require now with our current processes. Therefore, I support denser growth when it improves our community, unquote. What are your comments and reactions to Libby Garvey's statement?
Well, I think the linchpin of her argument is well-planned development. The problem is that the development that is currently ongoing is not well-planned. And that is precisely the problem with her argument for densification. She is presuming something that doesn't exist. Now, how do I know that this doesn't exist? Well, I cited in my own response to the question 2 projects in which transportation analyses were either discounted or disregarded altogether. For example, there's going to be a new massive development at the Marriott site in Roslyn, which I mentioned. And the problem with the transportation analysis done for that project is that it excluded the planned impacts of at least 3 other planned developments on the site. So how can you possibly come up with an accurate transportation analysis of probably the most congested intersection in Arlington without having the benefit of the information of the cumulative impacts of other planned developments for the site? You simply can't. Now, I also want to caution you that a transportation impact analysis is only one of several impact analyses that are needed to perform a true cost-benefit analysis. In other words, a true cost-benefit analysis would include impact analysis of several different types. Streets, schools, public safety, all these things are required to do a cost-benefit analysis. In addition, of course, to the actual rigorous economic analysis of the benefits. Now, if I can digress here, if what you're asking for is a cost-benefit analysis, that is absolutely something that the county does not do. Because if it did, we would be getting numbers of the actual estimated economic benefit to the county in the form of additional tax revenues for each site plan development project that we approve. And this, to my knowledge, has never taken place. So again, if in fact you believe that planned development is a good thing, it follows that you believe that cost-benefit analyses are absolutely necessary, but that's not what is happening. And again, another example that I cited in my response of the lack of systematic planning is the GLUP study that was done for Shirlington Village recently. They want to densify, the county wants to densify Shirlington Village. That may sound like a good idea, because right now this Shirlington Village, which is largely a restaurant district, is suffering severely from the pandemic. So the developer of that, the original developer of that district, has come along to further densify it. The problem is that no impact analyses of whatever type was done for that particular densification project, because according to county staff, a GLUP study does not require impact analyses, and that any impact analyses that are done will occur after the GLUP study is approved. Now, this strikes me as circular reasoning. It's not logical. I've got serious problems with the rationale that was provided to me by county staff, but clearly you can see if no impact analysis is done, then it follows that there's no cost benefit analysis, and that calls into question Libby's argument that somehow we are engaged in planned development. I believe we are engaged in development, and I certainly agree that we are engaged in densification, but I would not characterize that development as planned. Rather, I would characterize it as haphazard.
Thank you very much. So who would like to ask the next question? Ann, you want to take a shot?
Okay, thanks. Thanks for coming to speak to us today. We're very interested in the election, and we're following these issues very closely, and appreciate that you answered those questions we submitted earlier. I share your concern about tree cutting. In fact, I just had a tree being chipped and cut all day long right down the street from me, and it's happening pretty much every week. Two issues I know that have been bandied about in terms of ways to address this. One is a tree ordinance, and we've been told often by the board that that's precluded by the Dillon rule, so I'd like to get your thought on that. And another was an effort by Patrick Hope to allow builders to claim Chesapeake Bay stormwater credits for protecting mature trees. And would you be willing to support that? And do you think that's a good idea?
Well, let me answer the last question first, because I'm now feeling rather warmly towards Delegate Hope, because he, on another matter, he submitted a number of bills, basically a package of legislation to enact criminal justice reform in the state. You know, things like banning chokeholds and requiring the thorough vetting of law enforcement officers, and banning no-knock warrants, that kind of stuff. And I agree with all of it. And I'm particularly in support of it because of my opposition to the initiatives of Black Lives Matter, which I am not at all sympathetic to. I was glad to see that there is an alternative out there to defunding the police. And so if Delegate Hope is interested in promoting legislation that will preserve Arlington's tree canopy, I am definitely in support of that. And since he has had relative success with his criminal justice package, I would think that he might have success with regards to mature tree preservation. So whereas before I was cynical of ATAG's overtures to Delegate Hope, I am no longer, because I see that he has had success in another area. And so now with regards to the Dillon rule, I am at a loss to see how the Dillon rule prevents Arlington from enacting a mature tree ordinance. I don't get it. I do know that the Chesapeake Bay ordinance has been violated under the name of the Dillon Rule in Arlington County. So therefore, I'm very cynical of that argument. Now, what I'm referring to is the Don Redwood in North Arlington that was located adjacent to a resource protection area, or at least within 100 feet of a Chesapeake Bay tributary, right? It was located within an RPA, and it was nevertheless demolished. Now, the way that came about, this is my understanding of how the legalism by which that came about. It was basically a large lot on which a rather modest-sized house sat adjacent to that tree. What they did was they acquired the property, then subdivided the lot, placed in their design the new house, the McMansion, this oversized building, this oversized structure, on the portion of the split lot that was not in the RPA, leaving the old house and its tree within the RPA. They then said, okay, now according to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, we can't do any development that is going to increase the impervious surface within the RPA. So that meant that since they were not building within, the new subdivided lot was not within the RPA, they could get away with it. And in other words, it was a legal légère demand, a legal sleight of hand by which this was accomplished. Now, this was clearly contrary to the spirit of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. And I also believe that it was contrary to the law, to the act itself. But in defending this action, which they approved, basically what the county did was approve a permit. In approving this permit, they insisted that this is all that they were forced to do this by the Dillon Rule. Now, the Dillon Rule simply says that you cannot take any action legally that has not already been authorized by the state. But the state itself authored the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. So, in other words, what they're basically saying is that when they determine that they are in violation of the Dillon Rule, they can disregard any prior delegations of authority that the state already issued. In other words, the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act was in and of itself a prior delegation of authority. So again, I'm very suspect of their use of the Dillon Rule to prevent the county from taking action to preserve its tree canopy.
Thank you.
Okay, Charlie, have you got a question? Well, unmute yourself, I think.
Yeah, that would probably help, right? Hey, Audrey, good to see you again.
Sure.
Hope all is well. Thank you for suffering us for this period of time and answering our questions. I'll send two finance-related questions to you. They're dramatically different. I apologize if I'm stepping on Bill or Jim's interest in the questions they might have had. One is the whole affordable housing investment fund, the whole affordability of affordable housing remediation within the county. Again, swimming uphill against massively increasing land value, which makes affordable housing that much more expensive to support. The Rouse property is an example that came to mind within Arlington ASF, which is that large property out Wilson Boulevard.
Oh, right, yes.
And the county did have the opportunity to bid for that, and had they done so, they would have been able to perhaps to have a land grant opportunity for affordable housing, where the cost of the housing would not be based in the land, it would just be based in the structures themselves, and hence shielded against the effects of land appreciation going forward, since the county would own the land. So that seemed to us to be a paradigm for a much more successful approach to affordable housing than the county has largely done in the past. But the land is awfully expensive. So can the county, so my first question is, can the county realistically afford to buy substantial amounts of acreage or land area that would permit that approach to make much of a dent in the affordable housing problem? It's an affordability issue given how expensive land is, and the county decided not to bid on the Rouse property. So that was one finance related question as it pertains to affordable housing. A second one, which I'll pose now, which I don't think others would be as likely to send to you, is more of a niche question. When the county observes violations of certain of its provisions, the examples being the Washington Golf and Country Club failure to provide adequate protection in the storm environment for the surrounding neighborhood, each fine that was levied against the Washington Golf and Country Club was for $2,500 per event. And there were, 6 storms, and there were 6 or 8 events. So the Washington Golf and Country Club got hit with $10,000 or $15,000 of fines. But that's the wine price at a luncheon at the Washington Golf and Country Club. And there are other examples where county fines are very modest, $2,500 for taking down a protected tree. So the second financial question I have for you, totally apart from can we afford affordable housing land, okay? The second question is, what, if anything, can we realistically hope by way of increasing fines to deter unfortunate and illegal activities by developers and others in the county? 2 separate questions.
Okay, so regarding the Rouse issue, Rouse real estate or property issue, I certainly agreed with ASF that the county should have taken steps to procure that property. But for use as park space, possibly in addition to public housing.
Yeah.
But in general, the only way that, my understanding is the only way that a jurisdiction like Arlington can possibly consider the acquisition of land for the purposes of affordable housing is through a housing
a housing authority?
Yeah, a housing development authority. And this has been voted down by the voters each time it was presented to them. Of course, the county definitely put its finger on the weights or put its finger on the scales each of the last 2 times that this matter has come before the voters in the form of a referendum. Let's see, my recollection is the last time it was done was in 2013. I helped myself personally to get 1,000 signatures for that referendum. And then I believe there was one way back in 2007. I'm not exactly sure, but it was way back then. And in each case, the county vociferously opposed creation of a housing authority. And in the second case, it legislated through the General Assembly much stiffer signature requirement. And in other words, the original signature requirement was maybe 125 signatures, and it later went up to, I think, 2,000 or 2,500 signatures. So that basically, the county has prevented any viable public housing authority option to facilitate or enable the acquisition of land with which to build affordable housing. Another, I think, even more onerous thing that the county just did this year that escaped most people's attention is it legislated in its annual operating budget the repeal of a tax incentive for the renovation of multifamily dwellings. I don't know if you're aware of that, but there was a tax incentive on the books, apparently in the form of a tax credit, that area real estate owners could take advantage of, which I believe most of them were not aware of, and it was eliminated. Now, according to Christian Dorsey, it was eliminated because it brought no revenue to the county. Well, or rather, it brought no, it resulted in no renovations, he said. In other words, it was not used. And then, so if it was not used, that means that the credit did not cost the county anything. So that would then beg the question, why eliminate it? But I spoke later to a county planner who said that it was eliminated because the renovation, the landlords would take advantage of the tax credit, but wouldn't lower the rents. In other words, they would then take advantage of their renovated properties to increase the rents. Which now he didn't specify which and what properties this occurred to or this happened on, but I know, for example, there's been massive renovations going on just east of Cherrydale at the intersection of Kirkwood and Lee Highway, and those are all market rate units, or were once market rate units, that have now been extensively renovated. Now, so you might say, well, okay, so if the tenant was paying $1,600 a month before, he's going to be paying $2,000 or $2,500 now. Why should we provide a tax incentive for that? That apparently was the argument of the county. Well, I would simply argue that even $2,500 a month rent is a lot cheaper than your average Arlington resident is going to be paying for one of the duplexes that replace the single family homes north of Lee Highway in the same general vicinity. So I'm just raising issues as to the county's lack of good faith in actually seeking mechanisms to provide affordable housing. Now, your second question, you asked a second question, and that escapes me.
Yeah, it's a real niche question. Basically, does the county need to, as I understand it, it was 19 or 20 years ago when the $2,500 fine, not linked to inflation, was established for destroying historical trees or legacy trees. And I believe it was the same time period, and Peter and I have talked about this in the past, but I believe it was the same time period in which a $2,500 per event ceiling was placed on fines for actions such as the Washington Golf and Country Club undertook in preventing storm damage because of the renovation they were doing to their golf course. There was flow off of chemical waste and so forth. But at any rate, in each case, it's an approximate 20-year-old, not inflationary linked county fine on activities typically involving development of one sort or another, which seems to me to be a totally ineffective deterrent and should be increased.
Well, I would certainly agree with that. However, we're in a climate where tree destruction is rampant on public property that the county itself owns. So in this climate, it seems rather difficult to enforce fines and penalties on private owners for activities that we ourselves conduct with impunity on public land. I think we need to, I certainly agree that we should revisit the fines, if only in relation to inflation, but I think the first order of business is to stop permitting tree removal on public land, and to stop permitting tree removal in Chesapeake Bay resource protection areas.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we've got two people who haven't had an opportunity so far to ask a question, Bill Ruse and Jim Shulman. Which one of you would like to go next?
I'll go. Jim was slow. Jim was slow on the update. So, Audrey, one of our main concerns is sort of the infrastructure and services here in Arlington. And just, we don't seem to have the infrastructure and services to support our current population, much less all the additional population that the county government seems to want to bring in. From the 2015 Arlington facility study, they estimated the growth of, and this is before Missing Middle, before Amazon, they were predicting that the population would go from about 216,000 up to about 283,000. So that's like 66,000 new residents. And that's just, you know, before all this Missing Middle sort of stuff. So just to kind of get an idea of the magnitude of those numbers, Charlottesville, Virginia has an estimated population in 2018 of like 48,000. So that's significantly less than Arlington is considering bringing in. And Charlottesville had like 1 high school, a middle school, and 7 elementary schools. So, you know, 9 schools to handle 48,000 population. So my question would be is, how are we gonna handle all these new residents? And just to touch on one element of the infrastructure, where are we going to put those 9 schools?
Well, I certainly agree with the drift of your question, but I think it all goes back to what Libby was talking about earlier. If you have planned development, you know what your limits are. If you don't, conversely, if you don't have planned development, you don't. So and you will not have planned development unless you do a cost-benefit analysis for each and every action that you plan to take. And this is something they refuse to do. If they can't do something as elemental as a traffic impact analysis, they certainly cannot do something as important as a full-fledged fiscal impact analysis or an economic cost benefit analysis. I think those are the same things. Although an economic cost benefit analysis is, I believe, generally referred to as a fiscal impact analysis in the public sphere. And this is something they don't do. So in other words, the answer to your question would be achieved by doing such an analysis. You know, if we need to have 9 schools, do we have the place to put them? What is the cost of the land to purchase them? If we're not going to put them on new land, are we going to relocate them in other buildings that we currently have? None of these questions are considered. Or maybe put another way, if you don't do the necessary cost benefit analysis for your planned your projected new population, okay? If you discount the need to do that, then your impacts don't exist. All right, if you don't assess your impacts, they don't exist. And if they don't exist, you just go ahead and do it. You just go ahead and build. And that's basically what's happening that has happened with each one of the new public construction projects in the county, whether it be a middle school, a high school, the Lover Run facility, the Longbridge Park Aquatic Center. All these major investments were done without a cost-benefit analysis. And because those cost-benefit analyses weren't done, there were no impacts to study, or there were no impacts to report.
Right. Well, I agree. It would be a good idea. I mean, they should be doing those cost-benefit analyses, but I'm just thinking, even if you had the most brilliant people in the world doing cost-benefit analyses, where are they going to end up putting those 9 schools? In fact, it's going to be more than that because of the number of people being brought in.
If you did the fiscal impact analysis, right away, all right, you would see that the cost of the land itself to acquire the property to build the school would be prohibitive. Now, in the case of Arlington, the problem is even more severe than that. There is no land from which to purchase the property at any price. All right? But that fact would surface very quickly if you were doing a cost-benefit analysis.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Jim.
Thank you. I apologize for being a little bit late to the party here. I wanted to participate, if nothing else, to get to meet you, Ms. Clement. I'm a friend of Alicia Corton's, and I know she's a supporter of yours.
Okay.
So, and for full disclosure, although I'm active with this organization, Alliance, or the Arlingtonians for a Sustainable Future, I do not live in Arlington. So I wanted to, and even further, I'm executive director of an organization, nonprofit called the Alliance for Regional Cooperation. So just didn't want to surprise you with this question. And it's a little bit of a softball question because I didn't have time to prepare for tonight adequately, but I am interested very much in opportunities for jurisdictions in the Washington metro area to work together more closely. And so I'm wondering if you could just speak in general to your position on ways in which Arlington might be able to work with other jurisdictions. I know that there have been efforts to coordinate with Arlington, with Alexandria. I don't know all the details of that, but could you speak to this issue?
Well, I can speak to the need, particularly in the area of transit, both in capital investment and in operations. For example, it was made clear at the beginning of this year, I don't know if you're aware of it, that Metro could no longer afford to run a large number of bus routes throughout the entire metropolitan area. It was contemplating massive cuts in bus service, basically in order to service a very generous union contract that it had just negotiated with the Amalgamated Transit Union. Well, that plus the fact that the funding that it now gets from the state was capped at a cost of living increase of 3% a year, and Metro decided that it could no longer live under those constraints. So as a result, it was contemplating massive cuts in bus service. Now, of course, then the pandemic intervened and bus service was triaged anyhow. But you may have noticed if you ride any form of transit right now that it is also temporarily being subsidized by the CARES Act subsidies that funneled through to the various transit agencies around the nation, and that money will be cut eventually. So we will be back to the same situation where Metro has decided to triage bus service throughout the metropolitan area because it cannot live within its 3% COLA. That's basically the issue. And a generous union contract. So where do the jurisdictions come in? That means that services like ART and DASH are going to need to coordinate more closely to pick up the service demand that results from the triaging of Metro's bus service. So that's an area where cooperation is going to be needed if we are going to continue providing sufficient transit for area riders. And then the other issue is capital investment or facility investment. Arlington, as I understand it, is now constructing a new transit facility off Shirlington Road, and that is probably self-contained. But there are additional facility needs that the county has that must be satisfied by acquiring or renting property, leasing property outside the county in Fairfax County is basically what's going to have to happen because of our own land scarcity issues. For example, we recently acquired a property on Carlin Springs Road from Virginia Hospital Center. I understand that it was not considered to be suitable for a school or even a park because of congestion on the Carlin Springs Road. So they were planning on using it as an ancillary storage facility, either for art or for the police or the fire department or some other public sector agency. Now that is not wise from my standpoint. We should not be using prime real estate for storage facilities. Therefore, we should be negotiating with Fairfax County to lease facilities that we need that should not be placed on our own land. So if that's the type of cooperation. I would assume you also must have other ideas about cooperation, but that one is the one that comes first to my mind. Recreational facilities are a sore spot. A number of people in Arlington believe that we make too many of our facilities available to other counties without getting reciprocal benefits. And so that might be another avenue for future cooperation.
Thank you.
Okay. We've now given each of our folks on this call an opportunity to ask one question. So we'll now go through at least a partial additional round within our time constraints. Anne, you want to try another one?
Okay, sure. So we mentioned missing middle before the intro, so I wanted to get your thoughts on that. One thing that strikes me, the county initially was touting it as an option for affordable housing, and now they've sort of walked that back, but their research bulletins are still promoting it as offering more affordable housing. They're also saying it could promote diversity. And they're also saying something about the need for new types of housing, and I'm finding it difficult to ascertain what they mean by that. They seem to say they need 3-bedroom homes, but what are your views of these policies, and are the objectives the county are citing justify such a massive change in our zoning rules?
Well, one of my good friends, Suzanne Sundberg, construes missing middle as a developer's welfare program. It's a new way to make money. I figure that many developers probably think that they have maxed out either the amount of money they can make by redeveloping single-family homes, or they just feel that they could be making even more money if they had a new zoning ordinance. And I think it's the latter, because I understand from reading the compendiums that the county has put together that only 8% of the single family properties in the county have actually been transformed. So that's not really actually a very large amount. So the problem is that they are responding to demand, or at least they think they are. In other words, they believe that demand is now such that a person will pay $1 million and plus for one side of a duplex, whereas 10 years ago, he or she might have been willing to pay the same amount of money for a single house. So in other words, they're responding to demand, and they believe that they can command that amount of money. And that's why that is basically the pressure for revisiting the county's zoning ordinance. It has absolutely nothing to do with affordable housing, and it has absolutely even less to do with racial justice. In fact, it will promote racial injustice. But by framing the narrative as a exclusionary zoning issue, they have basically flipped people's perception of what is going on. And so many Blacks probably believe that if only the county were rezoned for duplexes and triplexes, they would have an opportunity to move here or an opportunity to stay here. And that's just, that is every bit as cynical as defunding the police. Defunding the police, most Blacks will tell you that defunding the police is the last thing that Black people need in inner city areas. Okay? But that is now being promoted as, I understand that you are not woke unless you're advocating defunding the police. And likewise, you are not woke unless you are advocating missing middle housing. And this is actually very cynical because I don't know about the case with defunding the police, who actually would benefit. But I do know that with respect to missing middle, the developers most certainly would benefit. And the example that Suzanne points to most often is the property in Highview neighborhood where the original home was assessed at less than $600,000, and each of the two units on the new duplex sold for $1.2 million, which essentially gave the developer 100% profit. Now, when you consider that the average corporation that is doing well does well on a profit of 10% a year, when a developer is making 100% on a deal, that is an incredible benefit to the developer. It's hardly benefiting the middle class homeowners who probably can't afford the mortgage, but it certainly isn't going to benefit anybody who's making less than area median income.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, Charlie, you asked 2 questions before, but here's a chance for a third if you'd like to take it. All right. Charlie, do you need to unmute?
Got it.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a more niche version of the question you and Ann were just discussing, and it goes something like this. Sure, if you put duplexes or triplexes on a $1 million house lot, they're each going to be $1 million, you know, so that's not a good deal for anybody who's not wealthy. But on the other hand, you could put a couple of lots together, maybe a total of half an acre. You could put up 12 units. They'd each be 3 bedrooms. They'd cost less than $500,000 each. They wouldn't be affordable housing still. It's still pretty expensive, but you know, you could have a GS-15 or something who could afford to bring his family into that 3-bedroom environment and live in North Arlington. And that is providing another type of housing option. It doesn't go to households of color at all. It's just this sort of pure affordability type of question. Now, there are good answers to why that's not such a great idea. I don't want to have 10 units, you know, living next to me here on my street. And there are good county-wide answers to that postulation. But what would be your answers that to resist developments of that type under missing middle?
All right, so, well, the impacts issue is the one that comes to mind. First of all, there is a school impact. We know this. We know that we cannot support our current school population. That what now 30% are sitting in trailers. That's not desirable. Secondly, and this is an aspect that I think a lot of people have not looked carefully enough at. But one of the points that I mentioned at the beginning of this interview was that Arlington is sitting on the Piedmont Plateau's fall line. And that means that any increase in impervious surface is going to have disproportionate impacts It's not the same as building the complex, like this 10-unit garden apartment complex that you're talking about, right? It's not the same as building in Purcellville or in Fairfax City or even in Annandale. The only other jurisdiction with a similar type of concern might be Alexandria, which is underwater a lot, which is now underwater a lot of the time due to climate change. But so therefore, because we are on the fall line of the Piedmont Plateau, we cannot take any increase in our impervious surface lightly. Okay, so that is one of the concerns that I have, additional impact concerns that I have that has never been addressed. And the other concern, of course, is related, and that's tree canopy. Removal of tree canopy, which would be necessary for any of these more densified construction projects, would further increase runoff, further increase the urban heat island impact, and further decrease the general quality of life of surrounding neighbors.
Yep.
So again, I would say that that my principal concern about further densifying Arlington County is environmental.
You convinced me.
All right, we've got about 8 minutes left in our session, and I'm going to ask Bill Roos if he has another question. Bill?
Okay, thank you. Audrey, you were talking about how some people want to defund the police department. If you look at the, and again, this kind of goes to what kind of infrastructure services do we have in place for our current population, much less growing population. The county auditor did an audit on the police department overtime, came out in May 2019. And some of the stuff in there is fairly amazing. They say Arlington County Police Department reported losing approximately 3.8 employees per month during fiscal year 2018. They had authorized headcount of 370 sworn officers, but they only had a functional strength of 319 officers. And the anticipated impact, they'd have to decrease police attendance, community events, and a reduction in investigative efforts for misdemeanor crimes. The county auditor also in July 2019 came out with an audit on the Arlington County Fire Department overtime issue. And there, again, they were mentioning staffing challenges, and they said that the Arlington Fire Department has an average loss of more than 2 employees per month, and saw implications in increasing of firefighters injured and other problems. So, I mean, what's the problem? Why can't we seem to keep police and firefighters here? And how are we going to solve that problem, and particularly with an increasing population?
Well, I agree with you that whenever you consider impacts, like I have in my own mind's eye the kinds of impacts that I'm talking about for any new amount of development. And of course, the obvious is schools. And the next most obvious is traffic congestion. And the third one, the third is public safety. In other words, public safety personnel. And that is an impact or a requirement that must be met in order to justify the development or developments that you have in mind. Now, as to why, you know, I'm vaguely aware of the reports that you discussed, but I haven't researched it. I know that the police report predated, I believe, the 2018 election that replaced Theo Stamos as the Commonwealth Attorney. But I know at the time the police department was deeply offended by accusations from her successor that they were guilty of excessive use of force. on at least one occasion, and they came out with a public rebuke of the candidate, which they claim they had never done before. So there may be morale issues. I know this much. I will give Arlington County Board credit. They did not go after the police who were detailed to that fateful June 1st event at Lafayette Park, where the U.S. Attorney General authorized essentially excessive use of force against protesters on that occasion. And Arlington police officers were involved because as part of an agreement with, I believe, the DC police, they were providing additional support. I'm glad that the county did not attack Arlington police because I don't think they were responsible for that incident. On the other hand, I do believe that the ACLU was justified, and they did file suit against they actually filed suit against high-ranking government officials. I don't know that they that they filed suit against specific police, like the Marshal Service or Park Police. I don't recall, but their focus was basically the top level officials. Basically what I'm trying to say is I don't believe the county has been an offender when it comes to delegitimizing legitimate police officers or efforts. I wouldn't be critical of the county on that, in that regard. However, the fact that we are not considering our personnel needs, our public safety personnel needs, when we call for densification is very definitely cause for concern.
All right.
Thank you.
I think we've exhausted the amount of time we have for Q&A within our 60-minute time allotment. And I'd like to thank you again, Audrey, for participating with us today. As you know from past discussions, our group, Arlingtonians for Our Sustainable Future, is not a partisan organization in the sense that we don't endorse political candidates for office, but we do feel strongly about many issues that are involved in the county board campaign, and that's why we're giving you and your opponent an opportunity to address them. So with that, I'd like to turn to you, Audrey, for a 2-minute closing statement.
Okay. So, all right. This year's choice in the county board race is clear. Do you want an engaged community leader or a rubber stamp? I am the former and my opponent is the latter. Libby Garvey may have opposed the Pike Trolley, but she has enthusiastically approved every gold-plated boondoggle considered by the board ever since, including the copper-clad Lover Run Community Center and Longbridge Park Aquatic Center. These white elephants are so overbuilt, they are already too expensive to operate. Libby has also rubber stamped every major site plan development project to come down the proverbial pike without regard to their impacts on traffic, schools, parks, public safety, runoff, or pollution. Now she is pushing missing middle upzoning, which will displace existing homeowners but produce no affordable housing. Further, she has said nothing about County Board Member Takis Karantonis' continued service as Vice Chair of the Alliance for Housing Solutions, the principal advocate for missing middle upzoning in Arlington. Unless Takis recuses himself from matters pertaining to upzoning, I think he's got a conflict of interest reminiscent of County Board Member Christian Dorsey, who was ousted from the WMATA board for failing to disclose massive union contributions in contravention of WMATA's Code of Ethics. As an independent on county board, I won't claim credit for rubber stamping done deals. I will not ignore fellow board members' conflicts of interest. Here's how you can help me restore confidence in county government. Visit my website at audreyclement.com, support my candidacy, vote or donate to my campaign, and vote for me on November the 3rd. Let's join together to make Arlington an exceptional place to live and work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you to my colleagues who participated. And that's a wrap for our meeting.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
good night.
Thanks a lot.